Hi, everybody. Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got David Burkus. David and I are going to talk about his. I've printed out the front page because I'm visual, so I like to see what the book looks like when I go to Amazon and buy it. So we're going to talk about how we can connect with people with purpose. And David has just got a new book out, which is this one, which I've read, and for the current climate of remote working and remote leading and remote managing, it is an excellent workbook to enable you to do that. You don't mind me calling it a workbook, do you?
No, that's fine.
It's actually really practical for you to, like, I've got a meeting with somebody, I've got a brainstorming session.
Yeah. No, it's a very different book from ones I've written prior that is sort of in the business, they're sort of referred to as the big idea book, right? This is very much more like a guide. I wanted to use the term survival guide because I felt like that was more like what people needed. It's like, wait a minute, how do I do this? But yeah, it's very sort of here's a bit about the research, but here's what you need to do to leverage that research on your virtual team. I also sometimes think of it because it's structured around kind of the life cycle of a team from forming to even all the way to how do you say goodbye, et cetera. So I've been calling it not a choose your own adventure, but a choose your own dilemma book as well. Whatever the dilemma you're currently facing leading a remote team is, yes. I bet we've got a chapter on it.
Yeah. And you actually wrote it in the lockdown last year.
Yeah, so I was working on a little bit different book on teams coming off of Pick a Fight, which was this fun audiobook project we did on purpose and motivation in teams. There was sort of a plan for an expanded one. And then, of course, in conversations with the publisher, as the world was ending, it was like, well, wait a minute, what the world needs now is not love. Well, it needs love, but it's also how do we survive this great work from home experiment? And so we kind of pivoted the idea that we were already working on to that. Wrote the whole book in about 8 weeks, which was, I say that, but a lot of the companies that I profile in the book, I had also profiled in my book, Underdog Management, because they were fully distributed or they were hybrid. It turns out the more you profile companies about how well they give trust and autonomy to their people, the more likely they are to be a work from anywhere company. So yes, in that regard, we were a little lucky. But yeah, we were trying to get it out as quickly as possible. From signing the contract to pub date was only about 6 months, which is an insane pace in the industry.
It is. My first book was in a similar, and it nearly, it made me ill just trying to get that in that sort of time.
Yeah.
So congratulations, well done.
Oh, thanks.
You actually talk in the book about how you were writing it using Zoom sessions with other people. So it's a technique that you were talking about in the book about how you can collaborate. You may not be working on the same thing, but it motivates you because you could sit there writing rather than sitting there like looking at the wall or something.
Yeah. So this is actually one of my favorite kind of productivity hacks for the work from home crew, especially the more extroverted people like myself, who this is a really lonely time as well. My wife is an ER doctor, so she's busy as all get up. And we have like this really interesting moment whenever she comes home because I'm super excited to have a real person to talk to. And she's like drained from spending 12 hours saving people's lives. But this was my tactic for writing it. And one I think more and more companies need to do. I call it work sprints. It's the idea of partnering with someone who you are, already get along with on your team, or even better, across teams, so you can get to know other people. And you're not collaborating on something. You're just there, exchange a few pleasantries and sort of go to work. I liken it to when you were studying in university and you used to go out with groups of people to study, and you're all studying, you're all cramming for a different exam, but you're all there at the library across the table. You're looking up every once in a while for a little bit of socialization and chit chat. What we did is we did 25-minute sprint, 5 minutes of chit chat, 25-minute sprint, and then however long chit chat until we had something else. And the other thing I learned, the biggest thing I learned beyond just being accountable, was the idea that when it came to drawing boundaries between work and life, it's always really hard when you're working from home to get the rest of the family to respect that I need to go focus on this. But if you've got a call scheduled, right, they honor that a bit more than just, no, leave me alone. I'm going to go be quiet in a room and I promise you I'm working.
Yeah, I've actually got I've actually got someone around at the moment fixing our boiler, but because I've got this, I've got out of the job of dealing with that.
Yeah,
and my partner is sorting with that. So the timing is perfect.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's a great strategy for drawing that boundary. But more importantly, I mean, you get a little bit of bonding that happens over those rest times between you and the person. Those were really my most productive hour, was Monday through Friday at 11 a.m. because it forced me to have to work on something. And I had this, this little face up in the corner that if I disappeared or if I looked like I was staring at my screen instead of typing would call me out on it. It was great. The difference, of course, is that I was opting into that. There's a lot of companies that are moving towards the monitoring software and all that junk. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about creating a space voluntarily for people to partner with each other to get a little bit of socialization and a lot of accountability.
So let's go right back up to the top in terms of, because we kind of dived down. Okay, so I was actually talking to somebody about this today. They, as a business, they see their culture is about the people. They see their culture about going in the office. It's all about around the coffee machine. It's all about going out in the evening and having after works. And the pandemic hit. So they actually feel rudderless or purposeless as a business. It's one of the things that they sell to people: come and work for us. We will pay you less, but we have a great culture.
Yeah, and now they don't. And I think as great as it is, I want to point one quick thing out there, which is that what they're doing is what a lot of companies are doing, which is relying on organic, serendipitous conversations to bring about that culture, right? There may be some deliberateness about what type of person we want to hire for and that sort of thing. So there's a quote unquote culture fit, and that makes it an enjoyable experience. But it sounds like most of what they were doing to rely on culture building was actually just providing unstructured amounts of time. And most of the companies that are sort of world renowned for their culture, even in co-located days, were a little more deliberate about that. They were deliberate about what their purpose and mission was. They were deliberate about making sure that everybody understood their assigned roles. They were much more deliberate about it. And that's what the pandemic and the great work from home experiment has forced on all companies, is you can't just rely on, we hire people that are a quote unquote culture fit, and then our entire approach to culture building is accidental. You have to be deliberate. What are the activities we're going to do? What are the ways in which we're going to reinforce core values, reinforce purpose, reinforce bonding moments and collaboration moments? So, really, it's interesting to see a lot of people say how hard it is. It was always hard. The difference is you weren't being deliberate before, and now you have to be. And that is the hard part.
Yeah, that most definitely is the difficult part. So in terms of building a shared purpose, what's your advice about that?
Yeah, so and this comes more out of Pick a Fight, although we touch on it a bit in Leading from Anywhere. Yeah. I have this really weird approach to purpose, because whatever the conventional approach is really not working, right? We've known about the importance of company mission statements and being purpose-driven, and every decade the term changes, but it's the same idea, right? Declare what you stand for and what mission you're on, and everybody will magically fall in line. I look at, for example, the Gallup organization and their famous Q12 survey of employee engagement. One of the core questions on that is, does the mission or purpose of the company make me feel my job is important? And the interesting thing about that is that's been there for 30 years plus now. That's been a question on the survey. There's only 12 questions on the survey. So presumably you get your engagement data and you realize what 12 items you need to work on to move the needle on engagement. And engagement stayed flat. Globally, it's about 2 out of 10 people say they're highly engaged in their job. In the West, so in the sort of Commonwealth countries plus the United States, we're sort of the rebellious Commonwealth country. It's about 3 out of 10, but that's still depressing, right, if you think about it. And so a couple of years ago, I started using a litmus test for whether or not what question could I ask to make sure that people really had internalized the sense of company culture. And the question I arrived at is, when I work with an organization, the first thing I do, maybe second thing I do, I introduce myself. Yeah. But the second thing I do is ask them, hey, if we were to describe what we're about here on this team, in this company, et cetera, if I were to ask you, what are we fighting for? Yeah. How do you answer that question? And I don't care. I actually don't care too much for fight rhetoric, for battle rhetoric. I think it's actually overused when people talk about fighting for market share and fighting against competitors and the war for talent and all of that sort of stuff. But what I mean is, people don't want to join a company. They want to join a crusade. They want to join a cause. They want to join something bigger than themselves. And when I use that phrase, fighting for, not fighting against, but fighting for, if they translate that in their mind to, this is our company mission, then the leaders of the organization have actually done the work helping people internalize it. Otherwise you end up getting an answer, something shareholder value through something innovation and integrity, right? And that doesn't really help internalize anybody. So I arrived at this idea that the key to making the transition, you don't have to rewrite your mission statement, but the key to making the transition is to help your people answer that question. What are we fighting for when we show up to do our work every day?
And you come up with these 3 different types of fight, which are the revolutionary fight, the underdog fight, and the ally fight.
Yeah. So I look at these as templates, right? Almost like if you remember when you were a kid, we used to play with Mad Libs, where it'd be like the sentence and you fill in the noun and the verb. And that's what I sought to provide. There's really, based on the research of what really motivates people, these are 3 different templates that you can use. The revolutionary fight is about how your company relates to the industry or to society. The revolutionary fight says the industry says this is acceptable, and we refuse to accept that. Well, one of my favorite companies on the planet right now, I'm friends with the founders, so I'm biased, is a company called Pila Case. They make cell phone cases and iPad cases and AirPod cases. They make peripherals, but they don't make them out of plastic. They say the entire industry says that using petroleum-based plastic is just an acceptable cost of business. They make them out of organic farming byproduct. They make it out of soy husk and corn husk and a bunch of chemistry stuff I don't understand. The point, though, is that the case will biodegrade inside of 10 years if it's composted, right? So most cell phone cases, you get a new phone, you throw the case away, it sits in a landfill for 10,000 years. This goes back in and becomes waste-free inside of 10, right? So this is, the whole industry says this is acceptable. We refuse to accept that. The underdog fight is not just about being small, it's about being underrated. There's a tremendous amount of research out in the last 10 years about just how motivating feeling like you've been unjustly criticized can actually be. And I come from Philadelphia. I was born in Philadelphia in the United States, which is the city that gave birth to the legend of Rocky, right? Our greatest sports hero in the entire city of Philadelphia is a fictional character.
Stood on the step, stood on the...
At the art museum, exactly, right? Yeah. And the interesting thing about Rocky, if you remember the very first movie, he says he knows he can't win. He knows he can't beat Apollo Creed. He just wants to go the distance because his whole life people told him he's a bum. And no one's ever made it the distance with this world champion fighter. If he can go the distance, he can prove that he's not a bum, right? And so that's what the underdog fight is about. It's about proving the naysayers and the critics wrong. And there's copious examples of this. Probably the most famous worldwide one is the Netflix Blockbuster story. Yeah. The idea that Netflix was actually sort of a struggling company until Blockbuster rejected them. And then they have this little chip on their shoulder that they can use to motivate people to prove people wrong. They were betting on increases in technology that Blockbuster wasn't betting on. And at the time, Blockbuster's decision was rational. They just knew that times were going to change, and they used that to fuel. And then the ally fight, and especially if you're in a strong customer service industry, if you're in a not-for-profit industry, is most likely you're in the ally fight, which is actually that it's not about us at all. It's about them. You get to define them. It's about them and what they're fighting for, and here's how we help them. We're the ally to them, almost like sort of, I look at it like the Lend-Lease Act in the World Wars, where the US was an ally. We weren't actually fighting for a time, but we were still part of it, right? Because we were moving. So I look at it that way. And a number of companies do this and say they do this, but probably struggle making sure that every person in the organization actually does get a connection to the customer or to the stakeholder or to the community that is served by them doing their business. And that's the real challenge with the ally fight. It's a great fight because it leverages pro-social motivation. You just have to make sure everybody's actually hearing the story of how your company is helping that group win their fight.
Right. Okay. So the $54 million question: how do we create culture within an organization in a remote environment? Yeah.
So I always love to rephrase this question, right? Because culture is this interesting thing where everybody says, oh, they have such a unique culture. And then when you look at the companies that are renowned for their culture, it's not actually all that unique, right? So it's not a question of how do we build culture. It's how do we build the right culture? Because there's a lot of companies with crappy culture, right? And I rely on a lot of the research from Google and Project Aristotle, which is this massive project. Google's a massive company, and they were conducting this on employees from around the world, partnering with some of the top organizational psychologists in business schools and in grad schools of psychology. And they found 5 factors, and I'm probably going to butcher this because I'm doing this from memory, but they found 5 factors of sort of winning team cultures. The idea that do you feel like your job has impact in meeting? Do you feel like you have structure and dependability, meaning that you can know what you're supposed to do and you can rely on others to do it? And then do you have psychological safety? When it comes to virtual teams, this study actually pairs with a study from about 10 years ago on cross-functional global virtual teams, right? The most boundaryless of boundary teams, that showed that the top teams had a sense of shared understanding and shared identity. Now, ironically, shared identity kind of correlates with impact and meaning, and shared understanding correlates with dependability and structure. So what I usually say now, and this is the easier one to remember than the 5, is shared understanding, shared identity, and psychological safety. Do your people have an understanding of what their role is and what everybody else's role on the team is? And especially in a virtual environment, of the context people are working in. Everybody's working in different time zones with different calendars. Some people are Zoom schooling their kids. Some people's kids leave for the day and go to an in-person school, right? So do you know that context? Identity has to do with that pick a fight moment that we're talking about, but it also has to do with how much I feel like this is my actual team. And I think this is probably the 2021 challenge, as some people come back to the office and many don't, is there's going to be this tendency to have us versus them be the co-locateds versus the non. So this idea that we are one team, we reinforce this one purpose, matters a lot. And then psychological safety, to be honest with you, is the hallmark of company culture, great company cultures in any capacity, virtual, co-located, whatever you want. If you really want to leverage the knowledge, skills, and abilities of your team, they need to feel safe to speak up, to take risks, to apply that whole set of knowledges without feeling like they're going to be scolded, because that's not how we do things around here. So that sense of building trust and respect is massive as well. So those would be my big 3 to remember. You could Google, you can Google Google's Project Aristotle and get the 5. But for those of you like me who prefer to just remember it off the top, shared understanding, shared identity, and psychological safety.
Yeah, I wrote down dependability, structure, meaning, impact, and psychological safety. And I made 2 notes off psychological safety, which was trust and respect.
Yeah. So, and this comes from the research of Amy Edmondson, that because psychological safety is this sort of amorphous term. Structure, dependability is easier to define. So I look at it, when you look at Amy Edmondson's definition, it's does the way that people are interacting, does it reflect the sense of trust and respect? And those are 2 different things, right? Trust has to do with whether or not I feel like I can speak my mind. I trust that the group will honor whatever I'm about to say. Respect has to do with how people react to what I say, right? And it's cyclical, because if I feel disrespected when I speak up, I'm going to feel less trusted next time. But they're 2 different things. And I think leaders need to be looking at both of those elements, and especially their own behavior, because how they respond. Are they soliciting feedback? Are they encouraging people to actually speak up and contradict them? The litmus test I ask leaders in terms of psychological safety is, how long has it been since somebody on your team tried to correct you, right? Or tried to speak up?
Have you been wrong?
Right.
I mean, I sit on meetings and I sit there thinking, I need to be wrong. I actually want someone to tell me, no, Tim, you're wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's been months since that happened, you probably need to work on how well you're conveying that people can trust you, and how well you're respecting dissenting opinions those rare times they do crop up. Because if you do that, you'll get more of them, and then you'll actually be able to leverage. I mean, the beauty of, we know that diversity is important. Right now, it's 2021. If you don't know that, I can't help you, right? But if you don't have psychological safety to pair with it, then you have all of these diverse perspectives, and no one feels safe to share them. So you end up getting a monoculture anyway, and that doesn't help anyone.
Yeah. And I think that we're going to be in as we move forward, we don't know where things are going, because there's, you go to Facebook and everyone's now an expert on COVID, but it could go in all kinds of directions. I think the one thing that we know for sure is that we don't know whether the vaccine's going to work and that. But what we do know is that, I've been talking to my business partner, for example, and he's getting over cancer. And the view, his view of going into a room where there's lots of people, he's not going to do it.
Yeah. And I would say that's the one thing we do know, right? I don't know when it'll clear up. I don't know if the vaccine will solve it permanently, or if we'll have to get shots every year or what have you. The one thing I do know is that not everyone's going to feel comfortable coming back to the office at the same pace. Some people, especially your top talent, probably won't want to come back at all, or they'll only want to come back for meetings and other collaboration sessions, but they'd rather be alone when they want to be truly productive. So the one thing I think you can count on, when do we go back to the office? We don't. At least not all of us, not all of the time. The future of work is working from anywhere. And so we need to be able to have the skills. That's why it's called leading from anywhere. We need to be able to have the skills to manage a remote team, even if it's a team we see everybody once a week. They're just never at the office at the same time. It's the same skill set.
Yeah, my partner's 25-year-old son is basically told he did live and work in London, and he basically said to his company, he's a salesman, and he said, I can live anywhere. So in fact, I've got a mate who's got a room in Barcelona, so I'm going to live there.
Yeah.
That's like, well, what? Yeah, why not?
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing here. So I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is a city, population-wise, it makes the top 50 cities in America possible, right? It's not a very big city, but a very low cost of living. And it's actually the home of the largest remote worker incentive program in the country. The idea being, you used to work in San Francisco or in New York, you have family ties here or what have you. Why not take a little bit of advantage of some cost of living arbitrage? You're not expected back there. You don't need to be back there to do your job. Why not live here and not live in a 1-bedroom studio apartment that costs $4,000
a month? Yeah, or whatever. Yeah, exactly. And in Barcelona, it's sunny.
Yeah. I look at the weather.
And I think that
to pick Barcelona over London. I'll be honest.
well, yeah. And I mean, even if you're looking at some of the cultural things that we have in London, Barcelona can compete with it. But I think that's one of the different ways that we're going to see. Some people want to work remotely. Some people want to go in the office. Some people want to go in the office some of the time. And some people will just say, I'm just going to go and live in Tulsa.
Yeah, or anywhere, right? Yeah.
David, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. I read your book before Christmas, and I've been waiting to do this. So I'm just going to put the piece of paper up there for anybody that's still watching that wants to go onto Amazon and buy the book. As I say, I've read it and I loved it, and it's a workbook. And I'm firing somebody remotely. It's the bit on. It's the bit.
Yeah, it's funny. Specifically to the firing, we actually moved that to an appendix because it was really depressing to think about in the context of the team.
But it is there. But
it's
really insightful because it actually talks about the fact that now that we have, what you've done is you've actually approached it from a social perspective, saying that you've probably connected to the people and and you may be firing the person, or they may be leaving. So why don't you do a whole bunch of things? I don't want to spoil the story for people. But there's a whole bunch of things that you could be doing, which actually makes the process easier or better for both sides.
Yep. Yeah. And the reality is, and I've been talking about this since 2016 in my book, Under New Management, firing somebody is not I'm never going to see this person again thing, right? That used to exist, but in the interconnected world that we're on, you're probably going to see their updates on Twitter or on LinkedIn. You may see them at a conference back when those start again, and whoever knows how much time. It's really more like see you later than it is goodbye forever. And if you don't take the human approach to it, which, let's be honest, HR and legal have not done a great job reminding people to take the human approach. They've just took the here's what we need to check off the list approach. So there's a lot to it. And especially when you're already connected and interconnected using digital technology because you're virtual, the likelihood you're going to interact with them actually gets higher. So it's more important to treat it. I mean, obviously, if you're firing them with cause and that sort of thing, it's a little bit different. But if they're leaving and moving somewhere else, you want it to feel more like a graduation than a betrayal, right?
Yeah. And we're all in a situation where people that work for us and they go on doing bigger and better things.
Yeah.
And actually, we should. And actually, I've known people that work for me and have gone on, and I'm really flattered that they actually, I'm doing what you taught me, or stuff, that sort of stuff. And it's great that people are going to fly away.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. The way to be a great place to work is also to be a great place to have worked. That should be the goal for pretty much every leader, whether you work in person with them or not.
Yeah. David, again, I actually could talk about all this all day, but I'm not going to because but thank you so much for coming on today, and thank you so much for letting me read your book and sharing it with people.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me and keeping this conversation going. It's one.
You're welcome.
We're not going anywhere in this conversation for a long time, so it's one we need to be talking about and making a plan for.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Have a great day. Thank you so much for today. Thanks.